Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome back to the Bloomberg Sustainable Business Summit. I'm Laura Millan, a journalist at Bloomberg Green, and coming next is Coca-Cola, one of the largest manufacturers and distributors of beverages, and as such, an important producer of greenhouse gas emissions and plastic waste. Over the past few years, the company has made key announcements and taken some action to tackle this issue. The latest was going from an emissions promise, an emissions pledge linked to sales, to a science-based target of cutting emissions 25% across the company's supply chain by 2030 compared to the levels in 2015. That will mean decoupling emissions from sales growth, and is part of a broader trend that we're seeing in other companies. And to talk about the Coca-Cola Company's latest commitments, challenges, and also what's coming next, we have Beatriz Perez. She's Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Coca-Cola. Good morning, Beatriz.
Good morning, Laura. Thank you for having me here today.
So tell us, I was just mentioning this new commitment by the company to decouple greenhouse gas emissions from sales. What does that mean exactly? Why is it important?
Yes, well, as we know, and we're seeing the pressure on the environment today, we all have to innovate and accelerate and do more and focus on the science of the issues. We know we can solve them when we work together as well. To give a little context, in 2013, when we set the first target around reducing our emissions, we thought that that was innovative at the time, and it was because it worked across the entire supply chain. So if you fast forward to today, and you think about scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 is about the supply chain. It's about the extension of your business. And some of those things you indirectly control. For us, we work in a large organization of bottling partners, and we have a large amount of suppliers. And so for us, that scope 3 is where a lot of those emissions sit. If you think about agriculture, it's roughly 25%. Packaging, it's about 30% for us. And so we knew that simply just focusing on scope 1 was not going to be enough. And the more we got into it, we said we must act now. We must act with a sense of urgency. And so we set the target to reduce the carbon emissions in absolute terms by 25% in partnership with the science-based initiatives in order to start to drive that fundamental change across all the scopes in the entire value chain. And we know that this is really important for us to do a lot of this work in the next couple of years because we cannot wait. The planet cannot wait. And I think we need more and more businesses to focus on science-based targets and to measure and be transparent about them.
Right. At the time when we are seeing many companies, and especially lots of consumer companies as well, making new, more ambitious pledges, and Coca-Cola, as you just said, is an example. Can we expect a more ambitious target, sometime in the future? Is that something that the company is looking into? Plastics-free, carbon neutral, any of the similar pledges we're seeing in companies elsewhere?
You're going to continue to see us be aggressive. A lot of our goals were aligned to our business in terms of what we had Vision 2020. As we know, it's 2020 today. You'll see that we're meeting those targets that we had previously set. Now we're on the next phase of that journey. So there is more to come. We did recently set our World Without Waste targets to reduce, to think about creating the circular economy. So we wanted to reduce the plastic pollution waste that exists in the marketplace and make sure that we were collecting that waste. And so we wanted to design in better materials. So the strategy has 3 components: design in better materials, move to using recycled PET, so getting the plastic material, creating bottle to bottle with what's out there, and reducing the amount of virgin plastic in the marketplace, as well as eliminating what we call the bad plastics, a lot of the secondary plastic packaging that cannot be brought into the circular economy. So how do we do that? As we design in more sustainable materials and design out the waste. And then collection is the second pillar. We have to get it back. So how do we invest in the infrastructure? And just this past couple of months, I believe it was August roughly is the timing, we went ahead and committed to every bottle back, for example, in the United States, where it's a $100 million investment to invest in infrastructure. It's in partnership with industry, business to business, governments, civil society. And so working in that collective with those investments, building in the infrastructure, as well as in other countries, we've partnered with our bottling system to create recycled facilities. We have one in Mexico, PetStar. There's a consortium in South Africa named Petco. So the collection piece is important and bringing it back into that circular economy.
Right. And often there's something that environmentalists said, which is the best waste is the waste that's never generated. So in a way, is there a thought, a strategy there in terms of to stop, completely stopping the production of plastics within the company, or is just the company too big to achieve that? Because obviously we would be talking about a giant effort.
Well, internally, we talk about our ambition to move to zero waste business. And so we focus very carefully across all aspects, and that's zero waste across, water, energy. It's the whole area of sustainability because these are not mutually exclusive. And so for us, we know we're on a journey and these are very big problems that must be solved. And we have to be a part of it, but we need to start somewhere. So before we move to completely eliminating areas, we have to actually start to make sure we have the systems in place because these are systemic issues with long legacies behind them. We have to innovate, we have to accelerate, we have to invest, and we need to partner with the experts in the marketplace to help us get there. And so while today we don't publicly talk about our internal zero waste ambition, we have the ambition to move to zero waste. We want to move to a fully circular economy. We are pro-nature, and we want to make sure that we're adding value and not taking the value. And how do we ensure that we're creating regenerative systems? And so part of what you've seen in our goals is that's the start of where we believe we can make a difference in today with today's technologies, while we also invest in the future to achieve that, what we call the internal ambition.
You've just mentioned, the legacy issues, but also the fact that Coca-Cola, the company, works with subsidiaries all over the world, has a long supply chain of providers. What are the main challenges when it comes to reducing both waste and emissions across these supply chains?
Yes, and so for me, I think that what we see in our business is making sure everyone has, and it might sound simple, but having common definitions of what do we actually mean, and then having solutions that can transfer. So while you earlier mentioned that we're a big multinational company, big can be bad, but it can also be very good because you can take solutions that work in one part of the world and you can apply them in other places, and you can drive scale and meaningful change. And so for us, part of it is how do we ensure that all of the suppliers have the resources, have the common definitions, are building science-based targets. So we moved with our procurement arms to create supplier guiding principles and requirements. And we do audit our suppliers and ensure that they're achieving those definitions that we've set out. And ours are based on the science-based initiatives. And we look at what the NGOs with World Wildlife Fund and others have set out there, and we partner with them. But that is really an important process because it does require setting it in the contracts. It requires it in having the conversation, but then being willing to invest in the audits and then put in place the mitigation efforts in partnership with those suppliers. Because we know that some large suppliers can do this easily, but then you have smaller suppliers who we don't want to take out of the economy simply because they need a little bit more time or they need support on the investment. So how do you help them with the funding to put the investment into these areas that are crucially important to the survival of our planet and to society?
That's absolutely right. And actually, as at Bloomberg Green, we the supply chains and the small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, is something that we have been looking into because, as you say, they're key suppliers of big companies, but at the same time, they don't have the financial resources or even the knowledge to reduce the emissions and do these big programs that large companies are able to do. Right. Another issue that I would like to talk about is the existing pollution. So the existing waste that the company creates. So one thing is trying to reduce what happens from now on, but there is already an amount of waste that the company has put out there. So what are the efforts to reduce that? What can be done beyond? What can be done? What's the company doing so far?
Yeah, so I'll give the example of some of the collection. So we work with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to help stimulate that circular economy, and that does require commitment and serious financial investment to make that happen. So we invest in programs in terms of cleanups to collect the material back in, as well as the infrastructure to ensure that those plastics are being brought back into the economy and making bottle to bottle, bottle to chair, or whatever you can do to make sure that you're not creating new waste, but that you're taking the waste that exists and pulling it back into that marketplace. What we have found is that there are definitely challenges with it. The systems are different all around the world. There are not a lot of consistent practices. And so we do need more innovation. So there's also other investment funds, for example, that have supported programs that Indorama or Ionica have in terms of enhanced recycling. So you can actually bring back some of those waste materials into the original form and use them, because there's also regulatory issues here as well. In some countries, you're prohibited by law to actually take that plastic bag and use it as food grade quality. And so we're also looking at how do we ensure that through new methods of recycling, so from mechanical to enhanced, that we're able to bring it back to food grade quality material so that we can keep that waste out of the environment and bring it back into the economy. And at the same time, help to advocate for policies and changes to ensure that we're able to do that, where the government, looks at it and feels that that is the right approach and is supportive of that approach. Because we do need to have many different systemic changes in terms of policy to allow it. We have to have the infrastructure in place, the financial investments. And then I also believe we have to scale the best practices and don't stop innovating. At some point in time, we will have great solutions that can be applied around the world that are also highly efficient and effective. And so I also, have my own personal dream of at some point in time, all the waste is eliminated in our world and that all of us are put out of jobs. So at some point, I'd love to say, you don't need a chief sustainability officer anymore. You don't need some of these titles, because actually business now operates that way and the waste is gone and the environment is cleaned up.
Right. That's obviously the dream scenario. But as we look more into scientific reports that look at plastic waste, microplastics, especially in the oceans, and the impact that they have, and the presence of microplastics in fish, and even just last week there was a report looking at the presence of microplastics in the Everest. So in the Himalayas. As we look at the amount of plastic that's already in the environment, I'd like to ask you, is it just too ambitious to think that all of it will be gone one day? Do we just need to assume that there will always be some pollution that we can not eliminate from the environment and that comes from that plastic?
No, I don't think we can afford to think that way. I think we need to have that bold ambition and strive to eliminate 100% of that pollution. At the same time, don't allow it to get there in the first place. And so companies like Coca-Cola have to take the accountability to ensure that we're not allowing it to get there at all. And so that we have the systems in place to make sure that we're not creating the waste. And at the same time, for the waste that's been created over the last several years, or hundreds of years by all companies, that we take accountability and we clean it up. And so that is why it is so important for these programs that are put in place, from the ocean cleanups to there's several of them, river cleanups, to make sure that those projects are funded and that they're productive and they're getting the support and the resources and the industry commitment. This is too important. Right, but we cannot, right? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. But my question always with these sort of programs, and I don't just mean the ones that Coca-Cola is sponsoring and supporting, but is that it feels that they are at a small scale. And that's where my previous question went to, right? If you're cleaning a beach or an island or a portion of the ocean at a time when we know plastics are everywhere, is there just, is it a technological issue? Is it an issue of scale because it feels like the whole world needs to be cleaned up at some point.
Well, I believe we have to have the innovations and the investments. I'm sure at some point in time, someone said we wouldn't be talking on video screens like this, or they couldn't imagine, their wallet in their pocket in their phone. So we have to dream big. People have great innovative solutions. It requires time, energy, money, and it also requires the permission to fail. If you don't try, you will not solve the problems. If you don't innovate and invest and sometimes fail the 1 or 2 times or maybe 200 times, you won't get to that one solution that is that solution that can help do it. And I think about this work as pieces of puzzles. So while it might feel small, sometimes small things can be big. You might not see where that puzzle picture is until you actually put all the pieces together. And you might have hundreds of tiny little pieces sitting all over your table. But when you look at just one, you're not sure what that really is and if it's going to make a difference. But if you like puzzles, I like puzzles. When you put it together on your table, if that one piece is
sorry
missing,
to interrupt,
right?
I think after the pandemic, we all like puzzles a bit more. We all spend
Yes.
way too much time at home.
I think I'm projecting. I think that's exactly right. And so, and many people watching know, if you can't put that last piece of the puzzle in, it frustrates you and the picture's not complete. But also, if you only look at the one piece, you don't see the larger picture. And so you have to start somewhere and you have to work the problem until you solve it. And we can't give up. We can't afford to give up. Future generations expect this from all of us. They demand it. They deserve it. And we have to be better. We have to be better at Coca-Cola. We have to be better as human beings. And we all have to work together. And these problems can be solved, but we have to start.
You've just mentioned the big picture, and that's a good lead into my next question, which is we're celebrating now 5 years of the Paris Agreement. Over the past few months, we have seen more momentum than ever building on climate action, both from governments and companies. But yet we look at the scientific reports, we look at the figures, we look at global warming and the extreme weather events that shows that it's already happening. So what's your take on the current moment where we have more ambition than ever, but at the same time, the numbers and the scientists are telling us this is not enough?
Well, with ambition, we need action. We need action. We need the investment. And so we can all admire the problem and talk a lot about it, but we have got to do. And I've seen, a lot of companies like Coca-Cola moving to the science-based initiatives, putting the investments in place. We work in partnership with our competition. I know that surprises some individuals, but this is pre-competitive space. We all either win or lose together in terms of climate. And we found during the pandemic, and I think it fooled some of us, that we thought it might be easy to, earlier on, I think everyone talked about, oh, look at this. Now, cars aren't out on the streets, the skies are clear, and we thought maybe we had solved the problem. Well, we didn't solve the problem. We have to act, and we have to be deliberate, and we also have to be very purposeful and transparent around the issues. And so I think sometimes that, people don't want to admit to where maybe they need some additional help. I see asking for help as a sign of strength, not a sign of failure. And I think we need to ask each other for help and permission and make sure that we're really acting with that intent and sense of urgency. We cannot wait, Laura. I know you know this. And we cannot, stand back and think, well, it's too big to solve. It's not too big to solve. Problems are solved in bits and pieces. Most engineers will tell you they look at the larger picture, but they have to start with the process to move the components forward.
So on that, what would you say are the next key steps for the company to take? You've mentioned there are internal conversations about zero plastic waste, but what can we expect to see in reality over the next few months? What are the next commitments for the company?
It's a combination of making sure that as we think about our water use, how do we tie that into agriculture and the nexus between agriculture, energy, carbon reduction across distribution, the whole value chain? How do we bring all of those strategic components together? And when we talk about a world without waste, it needs to be not just about a world without plastic waste. It needs to be a world without waste, period. And how do you create those bold ambitions where it's mutually reinforcing and creating regenerative aspects of nature versus depleting? And so regenerative is where we need to move to. And so looking at how we extend a world without waste across all aspects of sustainability, all aspects of our value chain. That's what you can continue to look forward, but at the same time done in partnership with others. And we'll continue to work in a pre-competitive nature and create those investments, as well as report out and be more transparent about it and align it with our business objectives. And so that true integration with the business. We're now in our third year of reporting out an annual business and sustainability report. They're no longer separate. And the last piece is compensation. So it's already in our short-term compensation. I would continue to look to see goals being set in long-term compensation. I've talked about this publicly. But what gets measured gets done, what gets compensated gets accelerated. And so how do we make sure that we are being very clear with our leadership and our teams and our partners that this is important to the business and we need to do this together, and this is something that is a requirement, not an option.